Kathy, and thank you to the Springboro Performing Arts Center. I think that's the name. But, I appreciate being here, and thank you artists for participating and for being a part of this exhibit. So some of what I have to say, it's kind of nice to know what the audience is, because I can adjust in terms of what I talk about. And Kathy and I had talked about a variety of different things, and it's like, it's hard to be all things to all people. And so hopefully I have something to share that you will find helpful. So the title of the talk is Joining Raw Edges, the Stories That They Tell. I have been working for about 20 years off and on facilitating projects with people. Some in my role as an art therapist, some in my role as an arts educator. And so the slides that I show will reflect that. This first slide is a pebble in the water. And I wanted to start with this first because, like a pebble in the water, our actions ripple from self to family to community and beyond. And I like to think of that what we do makes an impact. And my journey in facilitating group fabric projects started 25 years ago when I returned to college to take art and psychology classes. Ultimately, I earned a master's degree in art therapy from U of L. Since then, I've worked with a variety of populations, as I think I already mentioned that. So this next slide is the spiral. And sometimes events in our lives produce an opportunity for growth and change. For me, one of those points came after our parents died in an automobile accident in 1992. After being depressed for a while, I found needing to get back with a community of some sort, and I returned to school. I had originally studied as a chemist, and I did a whole 180-degree turn, and I took art and psychology classes and for several years, and then ultimately started working on the master's in art therapy and completed that in about 2002. While I was studying to be an art therapist, I created this piece. And it was kind of it was that change from creating traditional quilts to creating something a little bit more in the art quilt realm. And so that's that one. While I was working as an art therapist at Our Lady of Peace with older adults and chronically mentally ill, I also found time to facilitate some projects in schools. And this was at a preschool that my oldest grandson attended. And so the types of projects that I do really vary depending on what the population I am working with. And it's important, I think, to have an idea of what the abilities are of the people you're working with, and try to work at the level that they are at. And so on this project, we did the handprints of all the students in the class for the border, and pretty traditional quilt. And they made drawings, which I then transferred onto the fabric for them. I applied and was juried into the Kentucky Arts Council Teaching Artist roster, and so I've done a lot of different projects in a variety, from preschool up through high school. And so these next set of slides are some of the slides of photos of projects that I did. A typical project would be dyeing fabric with the students. These were, I believe, second graders. And another project was I would teach the students how to create print blocks and then print on the fabric. And with a lot of these, we use different techniques. So with the youngest ones, we would use a craft foam and cut shapes out, cutting the craft foam and putting it on a plexiglass to make a stamp, and that's what these students here did. They were pretty young students also. This slide is another process. This was a one-day project. They asked me to come in and do a project in one day, and I was working with fifth graders. And so I did one process with the first group. They drew pictures. It was to make a quilt to give to somebody that was in the hospital. And so I invited them to draw pictures with fabric markers of things that would make somebody feel a little bit better. And so the first group drew the images. The second group, I taught them how to do a little bit of embroidery, and they did added some embellishment with embroidery stitches. Then the next group matched up the blocks with other fabrics, and we sewed those together. This is going back to the printmaking. Starting at about fourth grade, I would teach them how to use a linoleum cutter, and usually the focus of the blocks that they created would be a self symbol. So we would look at Adinkra symbols, and they would come up with a design to represent themselves. And so they were learning about the culture in West Africa, and then making it into their own personal symbols, and then a lot of times combining them into quilts. These were another set of quilts that were donated to a local charity. And this was at a school in eastern Kentucky where they made their print blocks, and each of the 3 fifth grade classes created a quilt. And so they made their print block, they printed on fabric. Each class worked together on laying out a design of how they wanted their blocks to go. And then I used a system of an array of columns and rows to identify the blocks so that we could keep track of where they needed to go. And that shows that. And then we would put those rows together, and I set up the sewing machine, and some of them got to help with the sewing, but that was about a week-long project. And then we found somebody in the community to do the quilting. And this project, it was a legacy project for the fifth grade to leave for the school. And we did the self-symbol blocks with all the fifth graders so that they were each represented. And then I asked them to come up. They drew a variety of different designs that they thought would represent their school. And this is the design that ended up being chosen. And I don't know if you can see it, but each of those fabrics has been printed kind of tone on tone with their printed symbols. This was another different fifth grade with a similar type of project with their school logo. They were the Comets out in Campbell Ridge and Campbell County, Becky. This is my sister, the juror, Becky, is my sister. So, and this was down in Appalachia. They had worked with a storyteller writing jack tales, and then I came in for a week and helped the high school students create a fabric mural. One of the groups was a clothing construction class, and so I taught them how to put together log cabins, and they created the sky. And then the stories that they wrote got written on fabric that went around the edges. We did a variety of different processes. This was another high school class about women's wisdom. They were pregnant and new mother teenage girls, and they had a number of women elders from different cultures came and spoke with them, and we talked about the season of a woman's lives, and we represented that visually in that project there. This was with a group of refugees, and they helped dye the fabric, and then we printed using flowers and leaves and things to imprint the design. So that was a great project. This one was I worked with refugee women for about 3 years at the Americana Community Center, and during that time we did a community project where we invited people from the community for International Women's Day to create a block, and then they helped sew it together. And so now I'm going to move on to a fabric collage. And this is a project that is a little bit more art therapy wise. Art therapy, there's so many different definitions or ways that people look at art therapy. And there's the thought of art therapy is art as therapy, that just the process of creating itself, making visible what's going on inside, that in your art, it's like the unconscious is talking to you. And so whatever you're putting out there, you can reflect on it, and it gives you back information to help you and process things. And then there's art psychotherapy, which is more of that talking about, creating the art and then reflecting with the therapist on what that story is and where you want to go with it. Most of my work has been in the art as therapy and more of a community-based art projects. I did work in the Our Lady of Peace in the mental hospital for 3 or 4 years, but I decided that my strength was in community art building, that when I saw people at the hospital, where did they have to go when they no longer needed to be in the hospital for that level of care, but that they still needed something in the community to help them create art and to process. And so one of the places that I worked for 10 years was through the Kentucky Performing Arts Center from Louisville, and they had a program called Arts Thrive, or it was Arts and Healing, and then they changed the name to Arts Thrive. I was going to take this off. And that was a wonderful program. One of the first projects that I did there that was very popular was this fabric collage project. And what I would tell them, I would do this with scrap. I would bring in the scraps of fabric, and a lot of times they were just making an individual piece of art, but a lot of times we would also do some group projects, and those group projects got accomplished in different ways. So this is a stack of scraps that I had collected for an individual piece that I created, where I had pre-sorted into the colors so that I knew what I had to work with. And the process is pretty simple. You have a canvas, you have your scraps of fabric, and I thin down Mod Podge about 80% Mod Podge and 20% water. I just want to thin it enough to penetrate the fabric a little bit easier. Okay. That was the finished project there, and it was a donation to a substance abuse program. This is a group of people at a event at the Veterans Hospital. And this is how we often work together in groups. And sometimes we had an overall goal, and this one's a group of refugees, similar process, where you're taking your scraps and you're building up. A lot of times I use 5 or 8-inch squares of canvas. And this is one of the finished group pieces. I did several of these landscapes with trees, and the way it would start out was people would decide if they were going to create water or land or sky, and if it was going to be a sunrise or a sunset, what part of the sky they wanted. And so they would each do individual pieces, and then I put them together and tried to build a landscape out of what they created. We didn't have the drawing of that figured out quite far enough in advance. And then as we got going, we were able to add to it. The tree would get superimposed on top of the other squares. This one was by a group of, I believe they were 4th graders at an outpatient program at the mental hospital, and they decided that a comforting place to them would be at the water, where there's water, and we discussed what needed to go in the water and if it was sunrise or sunset. And so this composition kind of built from their input, and they're creating the different parts and putting it together. This was the Jefferson Community College, It was an introductory art class, and I was invited to come and facilitate an art collage project with them, and what the professors there wanted was for their classes to work together to recreate a master's painting. And so we chose Van Gogh's Starry Night, and so they were done in 8-inch squares. They cut up a poster of Starry Night, and each of them got a square to work with, and then they had to enlarge it to the 8-inch canvas size, and then we put them all together. Another fabric collage that was donated of a butterfly. It's a good sign, symbol of transformation. This one was a group of veteran women. I have several photos now of projects with veterans, and this was a women's group, Athena's Sisters, and they did the background. These were their colors, and their symbol was the peace dove, and they made that out of Army uniforms. It was superimposed on top of the background. This was another one that the veteran women's did, and they wanted to do something with poppies. This one was done a little bit differently. I ended up cutting up a regular canvas into the pieces, and then I kind of color-coded what colors needed to go where, and that was a little bit more challenging, but we did it. This one is a really good story. The National Wheelchair Games came to Louisville a few years ago. I think it was the summer of 2018. And through the Arts and Healing program, I was invited to set up to do a project with the visitors and with the veterans out in the lobby of where the wheelchair games were. And I had taken the logo, it was a 48-inch square canvas. I took that canvas and projected the logo onto the canvas and drew out the design, and then kind of color-coded it, and I had sorted the fabrics. So sometimes I feel like maybe the projects aren't quite as creative because I'm kind of already planning these things out for them. And you have to decide with a project, is it about the process or is it about the product? But in here, even though these things were kind of figured out ahead of time, when the veterans came to sit down to work at this, it's like their hands were busy deciding what colors they were going to put, what fabrics they were going to use for the colors and the placement. But at the same time, they were sharing their stories, and they were talking about their experiences and just getting support from each other, because sometimes it's a lot easier to talk when your hands are busy and you're busy putting those pieces down and you can talk with each other. So there's one more slide that's as far as we got there that weekend. Unfortunately, it was there drying, and my boss went to pick it up the next day, and somebody had taken it. And it was kind of disappointing because the VA hospital was going to hang it. This is another veteran project with women, and it hangs in the lobby of the Women's Health Center, the Veterans Women's Health Center. And we started out with pieces of brown fabric at an event where they could write messages with markers or different ways that I think it was mostly markers on this particular project. And also we used some print blocks that they had made to print the ground. They used flowers and leaves to print on fabric to make the leaves for the trees. And then a smaller group of veteran women worked with me to put it together. And then I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but this is a group of 4 veteran men that I worked with for 5 years, once a week. And we did all sorts of art projects and got to know each other pretty well. And they knew that I made quilts, and they said, well, we want to make a quilt. And so they've over two different times, 4 different quilts got made each time. And they dyed all their fabric, and they helped design it, and they learned how to use the sewing machine. And they went with me to a quilting place and saw how the quilting was done. And on the last one, a few of them helped move the long arm machine to quilt their piece. Another thing that we do in our family is make quilts for our nieces and nephews as they get older, either when they get married or when they get to be about 35. And these are my three sisters, Kathy, Terry, Becky, and me. And we're kind of the main ones, but we also get some other family members involved in the quilts. So I've got Anna's husband's in that picture. My brother Gene was there, that one, and that was it's one of the log cabin quilts that we made for one of our nephews that got married. This one was for my daughter. And I have one for Becky's son, Tolly, that is here on display. We also do embroidered blocks for our nieces and nephews when they're born, make some baby quilts. This is a project that I did that I co-facilitated at my church, and it's just a really fabulous quilt. And I'm going to go through some slides. We got all ages involved. So this was the printing of the foliage for the landscape, and then we did the tree similar to what we did in the veterans. We did a lot of different processes with messages on the trunk of the tree. There was a group of 6 of us that worked on the overall composition. That picture's taken from my house looking down into the living room. Lori was the co-facilitator of this project. And we've worked on several projects, and she created most of the print tools for the birds that are on the tree. And everything was printed on fabric and cut out, a Misty Fuse applied, and then ironed on to the backing. There was one big piece of fabric that was the backing that Lori and I dyed. Then I taught Lori how to use the long arm machine, and we both worked on that. And then we took it back to the church, and some more people helped with the binding of it. There's some detail of the birds, and that's the total quilt. It's about 108 inches. Another personal project that I did was create banners for the church. And that's the banners. This is a poppies, the personal one that I did of poppies, and that was a lot of raw edge applique. And then with the pandemic, I created a print tool of the COVID and did a variety of pieces of fabric and made them into masks. And I think we're getting close to the end here. I have a Facebook page, Pat's Fiber Art Studio. And I think either, Kathy, do I have 5 more minutes or not?
You can take a few more minutes and then
Okay, I have one more that I'm just going to show and I'm not going to interrupt, and it takes about 4 or 5 minutes. So this is the quilt that's hanging here. This is my latest group project that Lori co-facilitated with me. And I'll just talk as these show, but this is going from, I dyed the fabric, I cut it up into pieces. It was all done as a Zoom production. And so I taught people how to hand stitch and how to embroider over Zoom. There were other parts of the program where there was some storytelling involved that another person was doing. They came up with their own designs reflecting, it was kind of the winter of COVID. It was last winter, and it helped give people something to do while they were stuck at home, and to also process their stories, because there was another a literary artist that worked with them on breathing techniques and then on storytelling, and we created a journal, and then we also did this kind of group project. I was commissioned to make a quilt from the pieces that they created. And so this is showing that process of making that quilt from those pieces, where Lori and I both drew out ideas, getting input from the participants on what this quilt should include. And so we wanted to include the water and the sun reflecting in the water and a pathway, and there was trees for old growth and flowers for new growth, and there was all these different symbols that had meaning to the people that were participating that they created through their embroideries. And then it was quite the process to get those pieces and figure out how to cut them apart and put them back together. to then create a composition that holds together. We tried the different ways of doing the sun. On these pictures at this point, you're starting to see where I was starting to pin things together. We tried to use the sewing machine to sew a lot of things together, but then we would get sections that were really hard to put in the sewing machine, and so then those got pinned together and hand-stitched together. The edges around the sun end up being kind of, you can see it's kind of jagged, and it was, we end up doing, by the time that we got to the point of putting it together, it was April, and both Lori and I had been vaccinated by then. And it was such a relief to be able to work with somebody in person closely that we felt comfortable at that point to not have masks on. And it was just a wonderful experience to be able to help put this together. This was the fabric. I did a huge piece of snow-dyed fabric, which just seems so appropriate. The metaphors and the art processes are always great, but that we did the snow-dyed fabric for the back of the quilt during our winter of COVID. And so thank you for listening, and I will be around till 1 o'clock if anybody has questions. And we're going to take a little bit of a break. And thank you.
Well, I'm showing my sculptures framed on the outside, and they kind of are dancers, and they're made with paper bags. So I take from the largest paper bag, leaf bag, and shape it all to the smallest. So today I brought this variety. For this particular series, I started out doing little figures that were kind of like realistic, and they would be about this big, and they would be reading books. And now I abstracted them to the point of where sometimes they're twisted and sometimes they're dancing like these are, and that the like. Well, I'm a retired art teacher. I graduated from University Central State, where I was feature twirler, I tell everybody. So I still twirl two batons on the side and all like that. But I decided I wanted to teach somebody something, and I thought I'm a good shower of things. And so as the years have gone by, I've been able to show quite a few different things. I can do 30 things with a paper bag now. And so sometimes I'll go to a library or somewhere and show kids how to make penguins out of water bottles. So all you would need would be like 3 pieces of white crepe paper, 4 pieces of black paper, and a bottle, and some other scrap paper and slimy stuff. And so then for myself, I like to do the shapes. And so like I said, and I have some that are from about 3 inches all the way to 10 feet. Dragons and all kinds of things that I do. Yeah. I used to do costumes for bands, like funk bands, back in the day, like bands like Slave and Ohio Players, and I would do costumes. And I just recently started doing bands that I used to do, and they're back doing it again, like Marty and Yolanda Drake and LYD, and I just did a costume out of sequins. So then one of my bands was Hot Number, now it's 937. They asked me to do an album cover. So I've been working on it. And so they wanted to be kind of like this long-legged group that I do here. So I'm doing the band, and I'm doing the band in their personality style, however they are. And then I'm going to put it in a box and then photograph it with the layers of how they look, only they'll be abstracted like this. And that type of thing. And then I go places and I do story boxes. So I do the people realistically and tell a story. And so that's sometimes interesting to people. I tell stories from my past or that type of thing when I was little, and my grandfather, my grandmother, and like that. And they'll be in a box. So I collect maybe an Aldi's box and put the whole environment, the house, whatever, like that, all out of paper bags. Some things are on the internet but I'm trying to learn how to put more things. Sometimes they'll talk about, me. And then my daughter in Jacoby, she and I did something with Art Prize in Michigan a few years ago, and she's good at doing all kinds of things herself, creatively. So she was trying to help me, and then she had to work on other things. And so now she's doing condos, building and design and stuff like that. And then I'm trying to get all of this together. Then I have my other daughter over there, Peggy, and she's doing inside of those bracelets are paper, then wrapped in material. Now, well, this has just been a pleasant opportunity to work with the fiber artists and and Kathy Jeffers and stuff like that. Yeah.
I do fiber bracelets. My mother taught me how to do it, and I started loving them. I do them in my apartment. I can even do workshops at churches. I even sell them at art shows. I have some at art galleries. I did Third on Third in Dayton, and I'm having it on display today.
I grew up in New York, and I always wanted to be an artist. That's all I've ever wanted to do, and thank God that's what I'm doing. I went to Pratt Institute in New York, and I took a puppetry class with Kermit Love, who created Big Bird, and I worked for Muppets for 5 years, building costumes and props and puppets and all kinds of cool stuff. And then I got offered a job for Kenner Toys, which brought me here to Cincinnati. I did that for a little while, and then I started teaching. So I've been teaching for 26 years. I still freelance. I teach my craft, and I teach first grade to sixth grade, so no one leaves my room without knowing how to sew. And my work mostly is about myself, because it's kind of like my visual diary. So this piece is about when I turned 50. So, moody, reading glasses, and if this was on a wall, this spins, and then wherever it lands, that's what the mood is for the day. And this, I grew up in Brooklyn, so Brooklyn is like my Tara. If you like Gone with the Wind, Tara is Scarlett's ultimate thing in her life. So that is about that. And I made friends with Kathy a while ago, and she invited me to be in the show, and I'm really very proud and honored to be in the show. I have, for some reason, been interested in birds lately, so I think I might do some embroideries with birds, because for some reason they keep showing up, and I'm like, maybe this is a sign. So I'm going to start doing that, and then I'm going to start teaching online, which is a kind of not easy for me, but I've been on a lot of Zoom as an educator all last year, so I would like to broaden my horizons and maybe teach adults doing online courses. I have some work in the Kennedy Heights Art Center in Kennedy Heights, Cincinnati. I have some work in a store in Chautauqua, New York, which is all the way upstate. And I'm doing shows here and there, so you can find me. I have my business cards up front now, but you can find me on Facebook under Designs of All Kinds, Facebook or Instagram.
Art was something I did to relax, and I learned to quilt when I was in Japan as a professor. And the men, I was in law, so the men at the university did not know what to do with a woman, and so some of my friends introduced me to a famous Japanese quilter, and that's where I learned to quilt. I'm really inspired by my personal background. My family's from New Orleans, and so I do a lot of jazz quilting, and so the jazz quilt at the top up there is part of that. And I also do a lot about women. I just have this thing about women, and so the quilt that I have on display here is of a woman that I was at a meeting much like this. Took a picture of her. She had a beautiful dress on, and I took that picture and had lots of stuff behind it. So I also found one of my own photos that I had done while in Fiji of an orchid, and so I photoshopped the orchid, placed her in front of that orchid that was photoshopped, and then contacted Maya Angelou's estate to see if I might use that part of the poem on my quilt. And so that's, it's a bunch of things that sort of come together as I think through what I would like to do with a particular picture. These are 3 examples of things that I like to do. None of them is hand dyed. I do a lot of hand dyeing, and so I enjoy doing that. Photoshop and I are not very good friends, so I do a little bit of that. And then the jazz theme is there, though that's not one of my traditional jazz quilts. But this, while not hand dyed, is the kind of thing that I like to do with hand dyes. And then, if you'll see in both of these, I have metallic threads, and so that's something I'm known for, the metallic threads, the gold threads, which are kind of difficult to sew with, but make a beautiful picture. This particular pattern, when I was a little girl, I had quilts from my grandmother, and I could not figure out what kind, I learned how to quilt and do quilting patterns, like what was she doing? And the quilting that they did when she was quilting, they would have the quilt frames up in the ceiling, they'd drop them down, and they'd stick their arms on them, and they'd quilt as far as they could reach. And so that's an homage to that, where you're just kind of, it's not the quilting patterns we use, but that was just how far they could reach, and they would just quilt as far as they could go, and it ended up with a sweeping pattern. So that's what you see here, and that's what you see there. So I have 2 jazz quilts that I'm working on, and then a friend of mine was married in Fiji, so I have a picture of her in her wedding dress, and it's an African wedding dress because she's from Ghana, so I'm working on 3 quilts at once. That's kind of how I work. Well, I have 2 pieces that were just admitted to the African American Museum up in Wilberforce. I have a couple of books that I've been published in as well. MaxineThomasArts.com is my website, and that shows a bunch of my quilts as well.
I was at a wool festival a few years ago, saw someone the beginning of needle felting time, and I said, I think I could do that. I'm a farmer and a retired teacher. So we have sheep. And to justify the sheep, you've got to do something with all of the wool. So I guess that's my background as the artist. It's a way to use up a lot of wool. The enjoyment of doing it, and the reason for doing it, is to try to duplicate maybe a moment in history, a time in history. And I usually do them for someone, for a friend, or for a commission. But it's where they want to capture a moment with either people or time or a place or something like that. And for me, the challenge to create recognizable images is probably what inspires me. That in cold weather, because I don't do this except in the winter. When I can sit in front of the wood stove and have some time to do it. I've got 3 pieces here today. The first one at the top is called Nestled, and it was a challenge from an art show a few years ago about meadows and mountains. And so I created a family that was nestled between the meadows and the mountains. Pieces and parts of that are from different places. The house is my grandparents' house in Tennessee. So all of these are just pieces and parts of things. But that was for that show. This one's not quite done yet. But it's for a Fiber Festival show, and it's to depict a Fiber Festival early in the morning when people are setting up, and people come in. There's one local over in Yellow Springs that happens every year, but people come from all over. They sell wool, they sell felting supplies, fabric, all kinds of fiber art stuff. And so this is just that morning, people getting ready, and it's just called Fiber Connections. And then this one down here is an early one that I've somewhat redone. My grandfather in Tennessee had workhorses and used them, so I wanted to capture that. I had my neighbors one day when we were baling hay to pose for the two guys. They bent down and pointed at the tractor wheel, and I took a picture of them, and so that's my characters here. But some of it's remembering childhood time and or remembering neighbors now and different things like that. Most of it is in private homes because I've given it away. There's one up at Allwood Audubon Center in Vandalia that is one of their festivals that depicts, I think it was maybe the Apple Festival, but there are recognizable characters and activities in that. So if you go and see that, you'll say, oh, that's so-and-so driving the wagon with the horses and the people and stuff like that. That's probably the only close one by. But most of them, well, I've got a lot of them at the Furnace Institute, which is, that's a joke. It's the furnace room in the basement. That's where I do a lot of it, and I just call it the Furnace Institute. But that's where most of what I have hangs if I haven't given it away or sold it.
I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky with a mother that was a professional seamstress, so I have sewn my whole life. And I attended art school at Kutztown University in Kutztown, Pennsylvania. I am a quilt artist. I do predominantly portrait work. Lately, my interest has turned towards animals. With my animal series, what I am doing is eliminating the background, in which I am trying to bring the animal into your space. By taking the animal out of its cage and into your space, you now have to interact with that animal. And so as I'm producing this, I have to think about what kind of interaction you would have with each animal that I make. Well, like you said, I'm showing Fiona. I used, with the permission of the photographer from the zoo, I used photographs of his, of Fiona. This was from a photograph when she was about 2.5 or 3 months old. And so just using fabric, paint, and thread, I'm trying to capture Fiona's personality and what we all love about her. I'm currently working on a portrait of 3 puppies who are good friends and having a lot of fun with that. I also enjoy working with vintage and antique textiles, and so on the side, besides making animals, I like to make art quilts using vintage textiles that have a traditional lean. So that's my other interest. You can find my work at local galleries and small area museums. I've shown in Erie, Pennsylvania. I've shown at Quilt National. I have a quilt. These 2 quilts will be at the Contemporary Quilt and Fiber Artist Show next month down at the Cincinnati Nature Center. I've also had my work shown and published nationally and internationally in place all over this country and in Japan and France.
Well, I was a speech therapist, and then I got married, and then had kids, and then started things on my own in the sewing room. So I love fabric, I love to play with it and make different things. I made all my kids' clothes, but then that got old because they didn't want to wear those handmade clothes anymore. So I started quilting, and I've been in a guild for probably 35 or 40 years. I was president for a couple of years, so I've been quilting. Well, my mother-in-law was a quilter also, so I learned from her basically. And then the neat thing is that I have taught my daughter-in-law how to quilt, although she did it pretty much on her own. So yeah, we enjoy each other's company because we exchange ideas. This one is called harmonic convergence. And it's a term that they use in engineering or the sciences. And I had to make it all in one day because you get confused. You sew 1/2-inch strips, and then 1.5, and then 2, and then you keep going up. And if you stop, you get confused because it has to go both ways. So that one is harmonic convergence. This one is 5-piece wonder. If you look at it carefully, there's only a section of it that has 5 pieces. Let's see if I can find them. But anyway, it's turning those pieces around and around, and then you come up with a design. So I call it the 5-piece wonder. The other one I have is over there, and it's called Raspberry Sherbet, and it's a wavy thing. Since we've had the pandemic, I've been home a lot, and my theme is use it up, wear it out, make it do without. So I have been using up all of my fabrics. This was when I was on a kick of homespun material. This is one I call the pandemic, because it goes on and it creeps into our lives. This one I made for our 50th wedding anniversary, because we went to the beach. I have this one, and it's more traditional quilt. That's really what I do most of the time, is traditional quilts rather than the other kind of quilts. And the ocean always is a good source for coming up with ideas, so this is sort of my ocean quilt. Save your fabric, use it up, wear it out, make it do and do without.
I am a newly retired nonprofit professional. I've worked my life in nonprofits, most recently as a fundraiser. Well, I am a new felt artist. I've been mostly a hobbyist, so this is my first show. I saw felting and I just fell in love with it. I had to learn how to do it. So there's a local felt artist, and I saw some of her pieces until I was able to meet her in person, and I asked her to teach me, and that's where I began just a couple of years ago. And I just fell in love with the process and the medium and how it all works. So, well, I really like landscapes. This was one of my earlier pieces. He's all needle felted, the owl. And this is one of my most recent pieces, and I just find pictures that I like, and I get permission from the artist or their pictures that I've taken. And so I take a lot of pictures now so I can find something interesting to felt. And then I just crop it until I get to something I like and think I can felt, and hopefully it turns into something good. I am working on a piece to accompany this piece that will be a springtime scene. Since this is a fall or autumn scene, I decided to remake this with green hills and pink trees and wispy clouds that is a little more springtime, I guess, just to be spring. I do have a Facebook page. I'm on Facebook at Linda Crouch Repkin. I do post some pieces there, but I haven't done anything professional yet, hopefully in the near future.
I actually have a background in early education, working with small children, but from there I love to paint, and I kind of decided that I could be one thing or another thing, and I decided that sewing was going to be my thing. Some of them are just to have fun and be playful. Actually, most of them are just to have fun and be playful. This one was designed after architecture in Florida. You know what? After this show, I've been inspired to make a quilt, so that will be probably my next big thing. So this was from a trip to Florida to see some friends, 2017. We found a little tiny quilt shop called Flip Flop Quilt Shop, and I decided I was gonna make a dress as a souvenir for the trip. I've made several of these patchwork, is what they're called, kind of quilted, but they're patchwork dresses. And they have all sold except for this one. I've probably made 15 of them. And so Kathy, when she contacted me about the show, she was like, this dress, this dress, this dress. I'm like, they've all sold except for one. So I have this dress, and then I just recently made another one for another show. Oh, if you go online, Tracy's Sewing Studio, TRACY, and then the word sewing, studio.com. You can see some of my gallery of work, or you can follow me on Instagram under Tracy Sews, Facebook Tracy Sewing Studio. I also have a YouTube channel as well.
I've been doing fiber work for years. I started in, well, actually my grandmother taught me how to crochet when I was little. And so I've always done all kinds of needlework. And a friend of mine was a weaver, and she got me interested in weaving. This has been 40, well, actually almost 50 years ago. And so I started weaving, and for a long time I was working full time, so I only wove a few things a year. And the last 11 years I've been retired, so I've gotten serious about the weaving part now. And I also dye silk scarves. I mean, my grandmother inspired me, and then again, my friend who was a weaver, and just, I mean, I don't have any one thing that's gotten me into, you know, what I do and how I do it or anything, but I've found out that I could actually sell some of my hand weaving, so I've been doing mostly scarves, and I do like wall hangings and table runners, placemats, that kind of thing, and then I started just with the clothing recently, and I just love the different patterns and the different materials and just love working with it. This is what's called a Cocoon Jacket, and it is woven all in one piece and then sewed at the seam across the shoulders. And then I have scarves, which are different materials and different techniques, but they are all hand woven. I did have 2 of them that I had actually dyed the yarn for, but they sold already today. So this is all purchase yarn. I am at what's called the Artery, a gallery at Front Street. It's downtown in Front Street buildings. We're only open the first Friday from 5 to 9 and the third Sunday from 11 to 4. It's in building 100 on the 3rd floor, at the end of the hall. It's a gallery of it's a co-op gallery of 16 different artists. I'm the only fiber person there. We have jewelry, photography, paintings. So I'm part of that gallery. And then also I sell at the Contemporary downtown, their holiday sale. I sell items there. And then I also sell in Cincinnati at their Weavers Guild. They have a fall sale in November that I sell items there too. So.